Hi, Shayla.
Hello.
Hi. I think we are live.
I believe we are.
Hello to the people.
Hello, everyone.
And where's Emily? Emily, where are you? Oh. Emily, where are you, my friend? Did she leave? Oh, okay. We have lots of people in the room. Okay. All right. Emily, don't leave us. Okay, there you are, Emily. All right.
Hey.
Hey. Say hello to all the people. Welcome, everyone. Okay, everyone's waving. So I just want to say I want to welcome everyone. My name is Abdul Ali, and I'll be your host for this evening. And I'm really excited to be in the midst of these outstanding women writers, part of our Hurston Wright family, who are going to read tonight. They're also part of our faculty for Writers Week, our first virtual Writers Week. So we're just really excited to have everyone in the room. So I know everyone has kind of given their shout out about where they're from. So this is exciting. So when you get a chance, we can kind of scroll to see where everyone is from. I want everyone to know there's a Ask a Question tab that you will want to familiarize yourself with later when we do our sort of Q&A. And to support our authors, there's a call to action button where you can buy their books. And then a little bit later, we'll talk about that. All right, so I just want to introduce our readers. Give me 1 second. All right, so I'm going to introduce our authors for this evening. First is Dolen Perkins Valdez. Dolen Perkins Valdez is the New York Times bestselling author of Wench and Balm. In 2017, HarperCollins released Wench as one of the eight Olive titles, limited edition modern classics that included books by Edward P. Jones, Louise Erdrich, and Zora Neale Hurston. How appropriate. We're so happy to have you this evening. All right. So you've got the floor.
Oh, okay.
Let's see. I'm just trying to. Oops. All right.
Okay, so ready for me?
We are ready for you.
Okay. So I'll just, because I'm going first, thank everybody at Hurston Wright who made this reading possible and who made this Writers Week possible. You know who you are, Audrey, Keisha, Abdul, all of the folks on the staff. Thank you so much. And of course, shout out to the beautiful Marita Golden.
Oh, yes.
So I'm going to read from my second novel, Balm, which I often feel like, and I know there are other writers who say this, you have one book that gets all of the attention, but another one of your books is what you consider like your baby. So I'm going to read from my little baby here, Balm. Y'all can hear me okay?
Yes, you sound perfect.
All right, setting my timer. He passed through a narrow alley of shanties, walking towards the noise. Men bellowing, boots stomping, a rail hanging halfway off the porch of a house. Inside, one man furiously plucked a banjo while another stood over him strumming a fiddle. Hemp tried to sit down, but men danced into his legs. The crowd cleared the floor and formed a circle. Someone drummed on what sounded like a wooden block, and a man emerged and stood in the middle of the circle, tapping his stick on the floor. He bent forward and then backward and then forward again, circling his torso before he lifted a leg high into the air. The dance was dizzying. Hemp swigged whiskey from a dirty cup. In the corner, two men spooned grub into bowls. The room reeked with the vinegary smell of boiling pig's feet. It was hard to admit he could stand. A A free man chewing a dried piece of beef in a crowded room full of at least a dozen more free men, and still be sad. The smell of urine flushed the air. He loosened his shirt at the neck, felt for his money to make sure it was still there. Lustful men, dead-eyed women, a floor sticky with drink. He stumbled out into the cold. Air clamored into the gap of collar at his neck. He had no sense of direction, ambled aimlessly. He would never be a respectable, even without the yoke of slavery. The ties of unrighteousness bound him. He licked his lips, spat on the ground. Walking into the wind, shoulders hunched, hands in pockets, he dragged his feet over the dirty road. The drink slowed his thoughts, numbed him, but he could not forget. All he had ever wanted was a house of his own, a chance to love and protect and provide. He had harbored a vain hope that despite slavery's dominion over him, he might one day rule his own household. The Reverend preached on it once, used words like contract and legitimate, and Hemp had struggled to comprehend. But when he boiled it down, it amounted to this. He was married once, and that wife was taken from him. His happiness dissolved in one heartless stroke. He did not understand all of these fancy words, but he knew well enough the effects of them, their power over a man's life, this eating away at his heart. If the path had been open to him, he reckoned he might have become one of those men who made the laws. Instead, he was left to suffer at the behest of others. What then was manhood for the colored, and what was freedom if even God did not possess the authority to answer a man's prayer? A boy glanced at him, hurrying past. Hemp knocked over a cart, the wheel cracking against the sidewalk. The door to an abandoned store swung open, and he kicked it, the wood splintering. "Hey, what you doing over there?" a voice called from across the street. He threw his head back, barely able to suppress all that threatened to erupt. A cluster of men were pushing their way through a doorway, and Hemp hemmed his body behind them, driving them through the opening with a grunt. On the other side, a long alley ended where a man collected payment. He glared at Hemp, cast a warning eye at two nearby louts. Hemp dropped a coin on the table and proceeded inside. The room was large, framed by timber walls beneath a beamed ceiling. 2 gas lamps hung from ropes suspended over a square pen, 8 feet in diameter and 5 feet deep. The floor of the pen was brushed clear, the dirt packed down. Men handed their bets through a windowed opening, then filed into 3 rows of staggered benches near the sides of the pen. The more well-clad gamblers jostled for the closest seats. Hemp climbed into the highest row, his back to the wall. A cockeyed man clambered up beside him and clapped Hemp's shoulder. Men filed into the room until there was barely air to breathe. Smoke curled upward, faded into the ceiling. Hemp undid another button of his shirt and coughed, a taste of kerosene on his tongue. Movement at the doorway caught the crowd's attention, and Hemp turned with them. A line of men entered carrying cages. One by one, they lowered the cages over the walls of the pen, and a wave of darkness spread across the floor, the chirps of vermin winding into screams. From far off, Hemp heard the bark of a dog, a hollow arfing sound. A man emerged, the dog tucked beneath his arm. He placed it on a high table. The dog was white with brown markings on his face and chest. It wiggled its snout in the air, sniffing. The cur's owner calmly rubbed the dog's head. The timekeeper stepped up into a box and raised a hand. When he lowered the arm, the man dropped the feist inside the box. It landed on its feet, crouching. The canine took seconds to decide upon its first victim. It pounced, bearing its teeth into the neck of the nearest rat, leaped for another, dispensing of each one in a single vicious bite. The rats sensed the feist before they saw it, but it was already too late. One of them fled, pushing into the horde of scrambling rodents. The feist caught it, long tail dangling from one end of its mouth, a tiny angle of head from the other. The dog flung its head to the side in one motion. The rat dropped. The cries of the men rose, their teeth bared, balled fists pumping. The dog caught another rat, and then another, snapping them as they ran by. When the hit, the rodent huddled. One of them separated itself from the pack, and the feist went for it, barely missing its neck. The rat turned, planted its teeth into the dog's cheek. The dog yelped, dropping the rat and pinning it beneath his paws before gnashing it. It chewed, eating a piece of the mangled rodent. Loose flesh hung from the dog's face. Hemp leaned over and vomited. No one noticed, the odor of his sickness mixing easily into the foul scent of blood and animal excrement. Dozens of rats lay still in the pen, and though their colors varied from brown to black, they were indistinguishable in their sameness. Blood stained the floor. The fight eastward dashed rightward. One rat charged, running straight at the dog, and the dog dispensed of it. The other rats ran in circles, unsure what to do. There were still dozens of them alive, and it occurred to him that had they risen up en masse against the feist, they might have killed it. The dog was not much larger than the rats, but what it lacked in size, it made up in cunning. The rats had not figured out they were the hunted until the rug of dead began to spread before them. The animals hushed. The gamblers screamed at the feist, leaned forward lustily over the walls of the pen, urging it on, their envenomed faces a mist of glee and hate. Even from his place in the back, Hemp could see the tiny doomed eyes of the rodents, flitting this way and that. The dog paused, lifted one paw and then the other, pacing as if figuring out its path through the muck. The white of its coat had darkened, its muscled haunches shook. It peered wearily over at its owner. Hemp read an obscenity on the man's lips. The feist drew up, turned, pushing on for a final spree, and in one gracile leap, a primordial howl escaping its lips, it pounced again. When there was no more movement, the timekeeper yelled, "Time!" and the dog was lifted out of the pen, its owner hugging it. Men waved their arms fiendishly, others applauded, their coarsened hands making sounds like drum beats. Hemp moved to escape, pushing his way through the crowd until he was outside. Feeling that he had barely crossed some jagged border, a bluntish pain thundered in his head. His feet lifted, and he ran towards home, tilting his face up to the black, starless sky as he scurried along this bottom, this road of the unblessed. He wiped his forehead with the back of a hand. It would take many washes to cleanse himself of the wretchedness he'd just witnessed. When he arrived at the little rented house, an unknown man, some stray given shelter, slumbered in his bed. So Hemp reclined in the chair, resting his eyes, praying for the mercy of morning. Yet the vision of that carnal scene haunted him throughout the night, its clamor of baleful cheers, and he barely slept. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. That was beautiful. I know that you can't see everyone, but maybe they can sort of send you some snaps. If we were on a set of Love Jones, we'd be snapping. But that was beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For sharing that with us, Dolan. That was beautiful. I know. I'm really excited for your students. All right. So I am going to bring Emily to the stage. Oops. One second. All right, Emily. Okay. All right. Oh. Okay. Oops. How you doing there, Emily?
I'm doing very good.
Good, and you look awesome.
Oh, thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, Emily Bernard is the author of Black is the Body, which won the LA Times Christopher Isherwood Prize for Autobiographical Prose. And Emily is also a 2020 Andrew Carnegie Fellow. So let's give you your propers for all of those wonderful accolades. And I'm going to turn the stage over to you. All right.
Thank you. Thank you, Abdul. I'm thrilled to be here tonight, guys. And I'm going to read from an essay that was published in the Yale Review in, I think, 2019, forever ago, and then before. The essay is called Stereopticon, 12 Ways of Looking at My Mother. And I want to dedicate this reading to my students, and particularly to Michelle. Visions. I've always been fascinated by a bizarre event Zora Neale Hurston recorded in her 1942 autobiography, Dust Tracks on a Road. She was sitting on a neighbor's porch when she was beset by a series of visions, which she described as 12 clear-cut stereopticon slides. She was terrified by what she beheld. I saw a deep love betrayed, she wrote, but I must feel and know it. There was no escape from the drama ahead. I knew that they were all true, a preview of things to come, and my soul writhed in agony and shrunk away. I've read these passages to audiences before, but since my mother died, I've never been able to get through them without crying. The story is my favorite in the entire autobiography, which I first read during my freshman year in college. I later read the scene to my mother. I remember the look on her face, both satisfied and intrigued, as she put her finger to her lips and looked away. I had known the lines would speak to her, that we were drawn to the same thing, the promise that no matter how painful, life was always unfolding as it should, and it was possible to view all of it with a cold, clear eye of acceptance. There was something comforting in the strange promise that our lives are not, in the end, a consequence of chance or even choice, but the indifferent hand of fate at work. Home. Let's go so we can come back, is something my mother would say. I teased her whenever she said this. It perfectly encapsulated the most important feature of her personality. Over the course of 30 years, out of the many rooms of my father's house, my mother made a home. It thrived in the kitchen, which she organized according to her skills and idiosyncrasies. It flourished in the living room, where she sat at her secretary, composed poetry, and kept up with correspondence. It bloomed in the rec room and garden, and the lush plants that she cultivated as carefully as she did her children. By the end, my mother had wound her life down to 2 rooms. The room my brothers shared as children, where she kept her books, and my old room, where she hid her poetry. She kept everything until the end. My mother preferred being at home, and I preferred being with my mother. For both of us, the social world was largely an intrusion. Most people were strangers to her, even those she called friends. In the 7 years following her death, my father turned my mother's home back into a house. It was gradual and all at once. It was as if I left a living home one day, and on the next, I returned to its carcass, a house whose interior was shadowed in cobwebs, dank with mold, and littered with dead mice in my childhood dresser jar. But I don't blame my father. He had depended upon my mother to tend to the organs, soul, and lifeblood of our lives, while he took care of the hull. Every marriage, perhaps, is animated by a contract, spoken or unspoken, and this was theirs. 12. It is not a coincidence that Zora Hurston saw 12 visions. In ancient times, 12 was considered a perfect number. Hurston had grown up in the church. Her father was a preacher, and the number had biblical significance. 12 apostles, the 12 tribes of Israel, for instance. The images that appeared before her were compelling, but Hurston was also interested in the idea of a life foretold. The vision is a very definite part of Negro religion, she wrote. The vision seeks the man. The story finds its form. Many fans of Hurston's work don't like Dust Tracks on a Road. It is not a true autobiography in that Hurston does more concealing than revealing. She leaves out years and husbands. She loses track of the visions. There are holes where the stuff of her life should be, the things she didn't want to tell. But if you can't take liberties with the story of your own life, then really, are you free? I gave my mother Dust Tracks on a Road on her 48th birthday. It was the summer after my freshman year in college, where I'd taken a course on African American literature. Neither my mother nor I had ever heard of Zora Neale Hurston before I took that course. My mother went to Fisk University in the 1950s, where the emphasis was on classical education. She didn't take the one available course on African American writers. Even at Fisk, African American literature was not considered a serious subject in the 1950s. I teach African American literature. Today, such a job is not unusual. I teach and write about race. I care about literary legacy and inheritance. But even more, I care about the shape of a story. I like lines, gaps, and blank spaces, all of the things that can't be captured in language, whole lives lived in grace notes. The form is the story is in the form. I'm excited for her to get it, I wrote in my diary about Dust Tracks on the eve of my mother's birthday. Only will it be enough? White Castle. It was a tough summer, my mother's 48th. She was learning new things about her marriage and her power. I was too. A week after giving my mother Dust Tracks on a Road, I had a fight with my father that changed my life, or at least the way I saw it. It happened at church, my father laughing and reminding everyone within earshot that I was about to be a sophomore at Yale, home for the summer. The usual cute Bernard family hype, I recorded in my diary. It was August, the day before my 19th birthday. At coffee hour, Dr. Edwards, a colleague of my father's whom I admired, asked me about school, what classes I was taking, what my plans were for the future. She asked if I had a boyfriend. She talked about men and all their shortcomings. I nodded my head, hungry for her approval, hoping my furious nodding would conceal my ignorance about men. Men are afraid of intelligent women, she said. I agreed. Suddenly, my father appeared at my elbow. Be quiet, he said. Be quiet. Hatred bloomed in my chest. He said that women use that explanation as a cop-out because their personalities are not pleasing. To men, I guess, I wrote. A welled-up, long-denied anger surfaced. To my shame, I cried. I could never beat him, never show him how wrong he is, I wrote. After church, we went to brunch. A rare treat, my father was as cheap and tight as a fist. It had been planned for my birthday. We seethed at each other, silently daring each other to resume the fight as a waitress seated our family. Then the argument took an odd turn. So you think your mother is intelligent? Our eyes met. I was dumbfounded. My mother was too. I tried to clarify what I meant, but quickly gave up. Later that day, my father instructed my mother to inform me that he would not send me back to college unless I apologized. I am free, I wrote in my diary. I don't have to finish school, go to graduate school, marry a nice black boy, or even be a good girl. I can be mean and ugly and let my teeth rot and my voice grow screechy. Even my handwriting looked freer. Everything is out in the open, I wrote. There are no more secrets to be kept. But I wasn't free, after all. Or rather, freedom would have cost me more than I was willing to pay. My mother took me for lunch a few days later. It was a Saturday. Her eyes were rimmed red, her gray hair frizzy at the temples. White Castle. It was our secret guilty pleasure. I had to apologize to my father, she said. She could barely meet my eyes as she instructed me on how to shape the apology and what posture to take. I knew how much my education meant to her, much more than it meant to me at the time. My mother believed in education the same way she believed in God. She let him break her, I wrote. Her tears merged with mucus as she bit into her sandwich. She told me that she couldn't help me. My father won. I apologized. He reminded my mother and me of his power, and I learned to keep myself a secret. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Emily. Wow. I was looking at the comments, and I think we were all collectively holding our breath as you were describing your relation with your father and all of that. It's beautiful. I'm so envious of your students and so happy that you are a part of our faculty and our family.
Thank you so much.
That's really beautiful.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to get Shayla on the stage. And Shayla, where are you? All right. Hey, Shayla. How are you?
Hello.
Good. We're so happy to have you. So for those of you who may not know, Shayla Sebree is the author of Mistress. If you haven't read it, please run out and get a copy while there's still some left. And you are also the director of the Stradler Center of Poetry and Literary Arts at Bucknell University, and you are also on the creative writing faculty. So your students are in for a treat. I'm going to get out of your way so you can bless us with your offering.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for being here with us this evening and everyone who is here responsible for organizing. I just switched to headphones because my neighbors are outdoors having a party with no social distancing. So hopefully you can't hear their bass thumping in the background. But I'm going to read from my collection, Mistress. And for those of you who don't know, in the collection, I'm having a cross-generational conversation between a contemporary speaker who bears my name and Sally Hemings. And so some of the voices are Sally Hemings and some of them are the contemporary speaker. Also, someone in the background's doing something and not on mute, just FYI. But I'll read just a couple poems. And the first one, the title is, part of the title is Latin for in the very beginning. So, ab ovo, or Eve's daughter. Eve, bite taken, travels her center line. Rosalinda flowering her pallor. She is not ashamed of her nakedness. This she will not pass on when she's punished for knowing the holler hidden in her. We know nothing of her daughter, except her name means beautiful blue, that she knew 2 brothers before the flood. The second poem I'll read, for those of you who are familiar with Alex Comfort's Joy of Sex in the 1972 version, and for impressionable ears maybe cover them, the term for doggy style, or as he called it, rear entry intercourse, was la negresse, so the Black woman, and I found that not surprising, but still horrifying, and so I wrote a poem in response to the title of that sexual position. So this is called La Negresse, term for rear entry intercourse in Alex Comfort's Joy of Sex, 1972. Also, fun fact, it remained the title of the position until 2008 or 2009, because when his son revised the book in the mid 1990s, he thought there was no credible alternative to the Black woman. So, La Negresse. Coined for the curved mountain of our backsides, front legs tabletop collapsed. The term is French because we're foreign, women's desires in polite English. The term pejorative because I want my crepe paper lily white secretion maker trifled with. Worse than doggy style, the conflation of animals and deep penetration. La Negresse implies only Black women like it, my ass in tuned vibrato, or are the only ones willing to admit it. Mostly though, I want to know if that's how you liked it, Sally, if Paris made you in its manner of Blackness. And then a couple of the poems that are in the voice of Sally Hemings, most of them have dates, and in some of them she's speaking back from the future. And so this is one of the ones in which she's sort of talking to the contemporary speaker from the future. Je suis Sally, August 2017. In the never silence of a bug hum summer, you call to me, try to find me atop West Portico steps in a hotel placard in Paris. But you cannot save me. I am bound by history. I am burned letters and bathroom and parking lot at Hampton Inn. I am broken soup tureen and snapped shears and rusted skeleton key. I am Black wench, wench Sally, African Venus, Sarah Hemings, and I cannot be your coal mine canary. Cannot tell you which man will be true. Shayla, I cannot save you. You must find your own truth as fires ripple through you, as you decide the nature of your landscape, which bulbs you'll nurse to blossom, as you seek peace in this voice that is no more you than it is me. My workshop is on the art of subversion, and so some of the poems I've selected today, I hope are working in that way. Sally speaking from the past and speaking through some of the things that sort of exist about her in the contemporary world, and the language that exists about her that was written in newspapers in the 1800s. But this next poem is called Sunrise at Monticello, February 1790, and we usually think of sunrises as the beginnings of things, and this is very much so the beginning of something. Sally Hemings had at least 6 of Thomas Jefferson's children. Sunrise at Monticello, February 1790. The cold keeps the smell away from your slow ashen body. 10 fingers and toes in their right place, stiff shrivel and harden. Your little lips purple pursed, eyelids the soft velvet of curtains. The lack of lilt of your chest betrays your look of rest. I would give away linen and pearl, scented salve and all the things of this world, for your coo cries to startle me awake tonight, for this to be a terror birthed by dark, the dance of twilight's shadow. Then in dawn you'll become all I've ever wanted, a baby born to leave this little mountain. And I'll just read 2 more. Knowledge. In Spanish, I love the inversion at the beginning of sentences of interrogation or exclamation. I know where I'm going. I'm satisfied when the world's inquiries are presented upside down, so that I know uncertainty awaits me. No one ever told me my life would lack such clarity, a river of unknowns I should have known to anticipate. There is to know and to know, conocer and saber, subtler a difference than biblical knowledge and knowing someone biblically. In my 20s, I'm still not sure I know the difference. I'm worried I know all the wrong things. I'm scared these philosophical concentric circles will make me sick, teach me nothing. Again, thank you all for being here this evening. I'm so excited to chat with you all a little bit more and to work with my students this week. So this last poem is one of a series of poems that engages with the title Mistress, which is intentionally fraught. The term mistress is usually only relegated to extramarital partner, but it is a word that should be imbued with power, and we usually rob it of that in the ways that we rob Sally Hemings of a more complicated history and narrative, and the ways we rob women of their power and their autonomy and their force, women and femmes. And so this poem is called Call Me Mistress. Set your knees on concrete, lick my feet and prepare to give me everything that's not subversive. White picket fence and son-daughter-dog combo, no. Make me a factory of tiny, writhing tyrants. Make me homely, androgynous, exotic. Restructure my prayers, give my light to God. Tame the me that wants sex a la negresse. Be who someone keeps telling you to be. Make me your manic pixie. Make me your insert fantasy. You are in control of this. This is your worst nightmare. But you're in luck. Time's up. Jam the money between your teeth and leave. My name's not Mistress. It's Shayla. It's Sally. It's. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shayla. That was beautiful. Thank you, Dolan. Thank you, Emily. Oops, let me kind of bring you all back. One of the limitations of this space is that I would love for you all to just hear a raucous applause of us celebrating and saying amen. And, we, yes, thank you so much for sharing your beautiful works with us. I just want us to pause for a minute before we get into the Q&A so that folks have time to see on the bottom of the screen, there's a call to action button where folks can purchase your books. So we want to definitely support our authors and, for them to get your beautiful words on their bookshelves. And then I also, so I want folks to check those out. And then I also want folks to know if this were the Harlem Renaissance where Zora, worked and played with Langston and all of those great writers, we'd pass around like maybe a paper bag, and there'd be a fish fry and maybe a Big Mama, or maybe not a Big Mama, but there'd be somebody, making some really good food. So I just wanted folks to, I want to virtually pass along that paper bag because I want to make sure that not only do we keep this circle going for 30 more years, but, I just want folks to know that it's a team effort. So we're going to just pause. Okay. All right. So the way that this Q&A is going to go, I'm going to ask you all maybe one or two questions, and then we're going to take questions from the audience. So give me one moment to organize. All right. So as you can see in the comments, folks are saying how brilliant, how awesome you are. So, I don't want you all to blush too hard, but, if you want to snap a picture for when you're having a blue day, look at some of those comments. All right. How are you all feeling?
Good.
Really good.
Feeling good? All right. Wonderful. So I want the audience to know that we have this bottom of the screen says ask a question. So if you can make your way to ask a question, you can, ask a question. It can be addressed to all three of our faculty writers. It could be for a specific writer. We're open. We're equal opportunity question readers. So feel free to do that. But I'd like to start things off and ask the three of you about your historical mind, your leanings to writing about history. And I was just interested to know, as writers, as artists, what is your fascination with history? And are there maybe limitations and challenges with writing about historic topics, historic periods? Because I got the sense that the three of you had that in common, whether it was a personal history or our public history writ large. So I just want to kind of start us off with that question. So any one of you can get us started.
I mean, I guess I can start. I mean, for me, in giving a voice or personifying someone who is voiceless in history, who was robbed of that privilege and that right, I think for me, it felt like a lot of responsibility to engage with history, but I am a big nerd and love to read. And so I read about Sally Hemings for the first time when I think I was 10 or 11. And I just sort of ran with that obsession. I tell my students all the time to identify what your obsessions are and then sort of write into that and see where it leads you. And I, in graduate school, wrote a poem about Sally Hemings and realized I was still sort of intrigued by her legacy and history and the dearth of information about her. And so just kind of went on a fishing expedition and learned a lot. And what I learned was that it was, for me, a lot less about history and more about me trying to puzzle out what it meant for me as a young Black woman to live in this contemporary moment with this complicated historical landscape that is the experience of Black people in the United States. And for this person to be sort of erased in that history and part of that history and not part of that history in so many different ways was interesting to me. So.
For me, I feel like I don't really understand the contemporary moment. I'm slow in a lot of ways. Like I'm slow to process, I'm slow to grab things. And, I've been studying history kind of like my whole life. I mean, when I was in the 9th grade, my dad gave me a copy of Souls of Black Folks by W.B. Du Bois. And I didn't understand it. I was like, what is this about? But, my exposure came early. But there are writers who I think can really tap into the contemporary moment, people like Roxane Gay or people like, Daniel Evans. And then there are some writers who can do both. Someone like Colson Whitehead, who can do both, who's totally comfortable, both historically and contemporary. But for me, I just feel creatively, and even in, my scholarly work, I've always been more tapped into the past. And if you ask me about like what's going on right now in our country, I don't really understand it. But if I were to try to understand it, I would always do it through a historical lens. So that's just how I see the world, I feel like.
I understand that very well. I think, I get that. And I feel very much in concert with you too. For me, there's nothing more magical than making connections with the past and with the dead. There's something so sacred about being in archives and being able to, you go to Hurston's archives and you see drafts and drafts, handwritten lines, from dust tracks and there to watching God. And I just never have gotten over the magic of that and feeling, just that obligation to hold that and to honor that. And just, finding myself in these books, feeling very close to these literary ancestors and, what's the language around this, you're not done with the past isn't done with you. And, when I hit moments of fear and, lack of will, you just turn to a career like Hurston's, who obviously is really important to me. And, just you can see how she kept writing through all the odds and all the times that she felt misunderstood. It's just important to remember that and to think, I need to leave the same things behind because it's nourished me so much. I have an obligation to try to leave the same footprint, not just take, but give back.
Beautiful. Thank you all for starting us off with that question. So I just a quick follow-up. Are there any limitations for you personally sometimes with being focused on, I've heard this question asked once of Natasha Trethewey. Someone asked, do you ever feel like you can't really speak about the present because you're focusing so much on the historical. Do you all feel that way ever? Yes? No. No.
I just feel
It's
like for me,
definitely-
so much of the past is in the present. And so it feels like I think that's part of the reason why I think I set out to write a book about Sally Hemings and ended up writing a book about Sally Hemings and a contemporary speaker, because for me, I could just see sort of all of the echoes and the ramifications of the ways in which the past affects the present. And so even if I'm not directly talking about the present, I think that resonance is there. And so I don't feel any sort of hesitation to engage with the present, because it's part of the long continuum of where we are.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll have to have this conversation off screen, because, I have lots of thoughts about this. Let's hear what our audience members. So we have one question from Sonia. Are there any cultural customs that inform your creativity at this present moment?
Cultural customs as in African American cultural customs, or?
Yeah, I wonder, does she mean like rituals, or I guess it's open-ended, huh? I mean, meeting at the dinner table can be a cultural custom, right? And, I don't know.
I think, if I'm interpreting the question right, I do listen to the elders a lot. Like when I'm home in Memphis, and I'm around my mom, and my mom is one of 5 women. She has 5 sisters, 5 brothers. And when I'm around the surviving elders in my family, I love to listen to them. I listen to the way they talk. I listen to the jokes they make. I listen to the rhythm of their speech. A lot of that shows up in my work. I try to be a good listener to those things, because I know that, us young people don't talk like the elders talk, for example. We don't laugh like the elders laugh. We don't joke like the elders joke. So if we don't bring that into our work, we lose it. So I don't know, is that cultural custom? I mean, I would just say that, like, listening to people in your community and trying to take some of that rhythm into language.
I think a lot about how, as a people, storytelling has helped us survive. And I think a lot about the line, and there was I was watching God, excuse me, going back to Hurston, when Janie's grandmother tells her, I wanted to preach a sermon about a colored woman sitting on high, but there was no pulpit for me. And I literally, every time I'm behind the podium, I think about all the women who could not be there, and my obligation to represent them, to honor them, to challenge them, to be in intimate conversation with them. Literally, I just will hold the lectern and say, Grandma, I'm here. We're here together. So I think that tradition of coming to voice is an incredibly important tradition among African Americans.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's definitely talking to the communities of Black women in my life and just really holding space for them. And then they ultimately appear in my work, whether or not they think they are, or whether or not they think they're going to. A lot of the times I take these tidbits from conversations as I'm sort of puzzling and processing and grappling with different things, like this sort of community that it feels like breaking bread around the dinner table, like I did with my family growing up, like sitting down and having sort of Sunday dinner conversations. And that's what it feels like when I sit down with the Black women in my life in particular. And that really does inform my work, stepping back from, thinking about the work to just like be a person and be in community with people and to break bread with them. That really informs who I am when I get back to the page.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. So we have a question from David, who wants to know, how do you decide which passage to read? Is there some sort of research of the audience or some other factor that you use to decide?
Time limit. I was just going to say time limit.
Right.
I'm sorry, what were you going to say, Emily? Something.
Well, I think,
profound,
well, you know, no, exactly. I mean, I think, you know, the practical considerations for writers, you know, that invisible scaffolding. You know, I think I was talking to a student earlier, and, you know, we're talking about word limit, you know, what it means to go from the dream to actually getting published, and how you have to find a way to work within those limits. But time limits are important. And I think, you know, for me, reading that passage, it makes me feel so vulnerable. And I couldn't read it if I didn't feel like I was in a space of care, you know, and, you know, just wanting to be known by all of you here. You know, for another kind of audience, I might have read something that was safer.
Yeah, I definitely think definitely the time limit, but also because for me, it's a number of poems game, like how many poems will fit into this time period, but also a level of comfort with the audience and sort of the idea of sort of what conversation I want to have with people. You know, I've read some of these poems about Sally Hemings in places that feel a little hostile. And so I'll read different poems than I would read in this space. And so, yeah.
Okay, beautiful. Okay, we have a question. From our professor, Linda Voris. Shayla, I'm fascinated by the time travel in your book, not just Sally Hemings from the past, but the future too. Was this a way to keep her presence going, to keep her before you even when you completed the book?
I think the reason she toggles back and forth between time is because I struggled to write about Sally Hemings. I mean, I said I was writing a book about Sally Hemings for probably about 7 years, and probably only the last 2 or 3 years are like the actual Sally Hemings poems. I was just writing poems in this contemporary voice and writing terrible poems in Sally Hemings' voice. And the poem that finally changed it all was Just Be Sally, which I read for you all. But it felt like she was talking to me in the present. Like she was sitting down with me at the table when I was doing all of this research at Thomas Jefferson's Monticello in his presidential library. I wrote that poem, and it was the first time I sort of felt like I'd accessed a place where I could start developing her persona. And in doing that, it felt like she was talking to me in the present, saying, hey, this voice isn't really me, and it's not really you, but we're trying to do something here. And I was able to move forward from that. And it felt like that was a critical moment in which she needed to be speaking to me in the moment that I was writing, that needed to be present in the book. And then the other time that she sort of speaks from the present is her grappling with the term mistress, and then her grappling with her first sexual encounter with Jefferson, because it felt like something that needed to be in the book, but I felt it already felt violent to be writing this voice of someone who is voiceless in history, but even more violent to then describe what happened in that room. And I wanted to be protective of her and allow it to kind of be in this murky retrospective space for Sally Hemings in terms of her legacy and honoring that. So I think really the ability for her to time travel had to do with me understanding that this wasn't really her voice. It was me trying to understand what it meant for her to live in the world. And that sort of gave me the permission to sort of slide back and forth in time and space, which also helped me sort of develop the relationship between the two speakers, which was that it's this long continuum of history in which Black women's experiences continue to be traumatizing, and the fact that the representation of us continues to be problematic, and that it is what it was then, it is what it is now, and hopefully won't continue to be what it is always.
Beautiful. Thank you. All right. Okay, so we have a question for Emily and Dolan. All right. Emily, this is from Namata. Emily, so good to see you. My question was about your thoughts on doing personal family history as a historian and the balancing act of maintaining objectivity.
That's a great question. I think, you know, that question is exactly at the root of what drives me to keep trying. You know, I think the fact that I don't know, I'm always trying that balance. You know, I think the rule is, you know, you have to write from that, your own perspective, and of course that emotional truth, which is so important, you know, when you're doing personal writing. You have to get to the heart of that, but you have to be honest about, you know, what happened. But if you follow, I think, your own vision, then you are close to the truth. But, you know, it's a constant struggle to balance those things, but I think that's what keeps me writing.
Dolan, question for you. I wonder if you'd address why you chose that passage to read. It strikes me as so timely of the questions you raise concerning who is hunted and who the hunted. I'm sorry, who is the hunted and who is hunted at the moment of realization of those roles. Sorry if I messed that up.
That's okay. I thought, I've only read that passage once before, and after I read it, a couple people told me, that passage is so dark. Why don't you read something with a little more light? And so I never read it again because I always thought maybe it's too dark to read, And so I've read a lot of the passages in the book that are about the love story between Hemp and Madge, but lately I've been feeling kind of dark, to be honest with you. And so I gravitated towards it because it kind of reflects my mood right now, which is not one of despair, but which is one of weariness, which I think is how Hemp feels at the end of the scene. He just goes back to his little house and collapses in the chair and just, prays for morning. And I just feel kind of weary right now in general. I will also say, yes, to address the point about like the hunter and the hunted. That was the intention of the scene. The intention of the scene was, of course, very, very obvious, I think, in my mind, that it was about the, these vermin, these rats are Black and brown people who have been seized upon and as a kind of bloodlust by someone who they, could have overpowered, but didn't because of the forces around them. And it's very, very depressing to him. And it's depressing to me. So I don't know. I'm always the one that, brings the mood down, but that's just how I'm feeling. I was in a meeting recently and they suggested that in response, the people in the meeting suggested that in response to the present moment, we should all get on Zoom and sing together. And I wanted to just hang up, that's just not how I'm feeling. Sorry. But thank you for the question.
Yes. So my colleague Natasha, I'm sorry if I shouted you out. She may not want me to shout her out, but what or whom would you credit as your biggest influence?
Who was that for? Anybody?
Yeah, that's for all of you.
I think I can say, it's my mother. I learned how to write by watching her. And I mean, literally, I was writing terrible poetry when I was a kid. And, she would take my poetry really seriously and write in the margins. And at some point she said to me, because my poems were getting longer, the lines were getting longer, she said, "Emily, you're not a poet." But and I never wrote another poem, but of course what she meant was, you're free to be you. You can be a prose writer. It's okay. I was so at the hip with her, but she was such a fierce writer. And, she was writing right up to the end, and she taught me the value of labor, that is really the key to all this. And, it's always trying to live up to that standard, she said.
Wow. Was your mom a poet?
She was a poet. She studied with Mr. Robert Hayden at Fisk.
At Fisk?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. That's exciting.
He would take her to readings and say, "Folks, you're watching the kettle boil." And, those are just, I loved hearing those stories about her reading,
That's so exciting. Influence, Dolan, Shayla.
I'm influenced by everybody that I read. I feel like, everybody that I read and love, there's a little bit of them in my work. And I absorb like that. And sometimes I'll finish reading something and I get like right to the page. I'm so inspired and different people inspire me in different ways. Like, I can be inspired by the lines of Toni Morrison, but I can also be inspired by the sort of, gut-wrenching honesty of, Edward P. Jones. I mean, there's just a lot of ways that I don't know how, I never know how to answer the inspiration question, because I feel like I'm inspired by everybody around me. I'm inspired by a lot of my peers. I mean, I know so many of my friend writers, Naomi Jackson and Angela Flournoy, and, just so many of my peers who write, and I absorb their work and bring it into my work too. So it's not even just sort of like the elders of our tradition. I'm also inspired, I'm inspired by you, Emily. I mean,
as I'm inspired by you.
and it just moves me. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I also have a difficult time answering this question because it also feels like I'm influenced by just a wide variety of things: music, visual art, other books. But I have to say, I grew up in a family. My brother, for 12 to 15 years, was a police officer. My dad was in the Navy and is in private sector security. My mom's a lawyer. And I was like, I think I want to write things. And so I think for me, they always sort of, even though they were like, we do not fully understand you, we support you. And I think that continued support through and through, even when my mom was like, are you going to get a job? Even when she was skeptical of like, if this was really going to pan out for me, they've always had my back, and they've always been like, you've got this. Like, even when I was ready to quit, my father said to me what I've said to a whole bunch of other people, which was like, you're a writer because you write. And he was like, aren't you a writer because you write? Does it matter if you have a fancy job or get published, but like, you're a writer because you get on the page? And I was like, man, so you're actually listening to me, which is great. But I have really appreciated having them. And I think knowing that they've always been in my corner has helped me stay on the page, even when I've kind of wanted to give up.
Wow. If only we could have more parents like you.
Yes. I mean, it's not always like that. My mother was like, so you're going to get a job, right? You're going to yeah, we love you and we support you, but get a job. But I did have some really great moments, and really grateful for them to kind of keep pushing for me to succeed. So
I once heard Rita Dove answered this very question as, my biggest influence may be the one that's unknown. And how, that was like, wow, what a way to shut somebody up, like, that's deep. That's so deep. Like, let me go to the next question. All right, so we're coming up at time. So can we close sort of this Q&A with each of you maybe filling in the blank? My biggest fear about writing is blank. Let's end with that, if you have one. Hopefully, I know I have lots.
I think my biggest fear is that fear will overwhelm me. I think I have to confess exactly why you sit down, right? It's about fighting back the fear, because the fear will kill you, if you let it win. And but it's a struggle for me every time to have the courage, and that's what it takes, to confront it head on.
Thank you for that.
I think my biggest fear is that I don't have enough time, that I just won't get down everything I need to say and the stories that I want to write. And I just fear that the clock is going to give up on me, and then it'll be over, and then I won't have time. I'll die. And then, I just fear that. I pray for time.
And I think my biggest fear is that I'll stop, not because I want to, but similarly because of the time and other constraints and other things that are calling my attention. And it's the thing that makes me feel most like me. So I fear stopping, because then I feel like I would struggle to kind of navigate my way through the world and understand myself even. So.
Thank you all so much, each of you, for sharing your heart, and your genius, with us, for honoring Zora, for honoring Richard Wright, for honoring Marita, for honoring all of us. Thank you so much. And I'm just so excited for each of your students who will be able to sit with you over the next couple of days. And hopefully you all will join us over the next week, because we have writing stuff happening every day. But for now, we'll see you all tomorrow for our class. We'll be there at 11:30. And let me know if you have any questions or anything like that. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, audience. Thank you. Jazz hands. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.